Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. And we have a important science show for you today. We've talked about intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding. You know, I always like to call it a more ancestral meal frequency. When we first started talking about intermittent fasting, you know, there was a whole bunch of people out there who became zealots. You have intermittent fasting apps, you have intermittent fasting diets, you have, you know, and I just like to say, you know, probably the way we ate 1,000, 2,000, maybe 40,000 years ago, really, when we didn't have agriculture to grow food and put it at our access every second of the day. And we had to go out and find food. And usually in the morning, you know, you got up, you were hungry. As Dr. Malin Watfi talks about in his book of Doves, Diplomats, and Diabetes, when the peptides that blunt fear rise, you were willing to go out and risk becoming food in order to find food, which means that we didn't have a refrigerator to walk over to before Jimmy Kimmel's show started. We couldn't eat all hours of the day. And here we are today looking at research that probably has a lot to do with the millions of years of evolutionary selection pressures that we have sustained. We've talked about the role of metabolic flexibility on this show years ago. And then ketones became all the rage. We found out, oh, we have these alternate substrates that the body can run on called ketones for when we're starving. we don't fall over and become food. And I'm really excited that science is paying attention to this now. We're going to talk about a show today, a study that was published that looks at the effects of not only cancer, but on heart disease and people who have had cancer when they observe a very realistic, non-heroic, time-restricted feeding pattern. I mean, you know, the weekends they have for themselves, but Monday through Friday, they stick to an 8-hour eating window. And some magic happens. It's really, really interesting. We're going to talk about that in just a second with my guest, Dr. Amy Kirkham. Before we do that, we have to plug our title sponsor, which is Legendary Foods, helping you stay in your dietary lane. If you are a low sugar, low carb person like I am, finding things that taste decadent and snackish is difficult. Most healthy snacks taste like cardboard. But this is a big difference. Ron Penna over at Legendary Foods is a genius when it comes to making healthy snack foods. He really is. I kid you not. If you haven't tried a tasty pastry, when you do try your first one, what you'll realize is it tastes like you're really eating a pastry. It tastes like cake. It's puffy. It's the mouthfeel, the flavors, the lack of weird smells from fake ingredients. I mean, it's just... I just went through 4 boxes of them in no time. And you will too. I'm warning you now. Like if you never want to wake up the sensation of eating something that's less than 1 gram of sugar, 4 to 5 net carbs, and 20 grams of high quality, high leucine protein, while feeling like you're eating something you shouldn't be, then you should probably never have your first tasty pastry. The other thing that's great about tasty pastries is your kids love them. You can't get your kids to eat a healthy protein bar. You can't. They know it tastes like crap. And they're not going to lie to themselves just because it fits their macros. But your kids will love tasty pastries. They'll take them to school. Their friends will think they're eating a crappy Pop-Tart, and they're not. And their friends will be envious of them. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10. Show them some love. They are a great company that truly does care about people's outcome. And that's why they make this stuff, because they know that we want things that taste like we're not supposed to be eating them, and they give them to us. And now, without further delay, bring my guest on. Dr. Amy Kirkham, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carl. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. You know, I wanted to just tell the audience what you and I talked about off the air before, because I've just turned 64, and apparently I've become an official curmudgeon. But I've just lost faith in a lot of science, and it's not because the science is bad, but it's because the organizations at universities that are responsible for getting the word out about this fantastic study, like yours, and they didn't do this with yours, but they typically go a little too far overboard, and then a couple years later, you know, what do you think about that? I mean, it's obviously their job; they have to get attention. But as a scientist, do you ever become frustrated with some of the overreaching and hyperbole that they use to get attention?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not in that you're frustrated, but you're concerned about that happening. When media outlets first contact you to talk about your work, it's part of the training nowadays to become a scientist, is to learn how to try to not let media distort the implications of your research. And I think, you know, for the most part, it is the scientists who want that to happen. Like, when things get blown out of proportion in articles, I don't think most of the scientists on that study would actually advocate for those flashy titles and whatever else. So yeah, you're right. I think generally the media coverage of this paper of mine that we're discussing today has been pretty straightforward, but I really tried to make sure I placed it into context when I talked to the media, but unfortunately that's not always possible.
I think that the other problem is that because of the media reaches the general population, I think that in the mind of the general population, if we look from an epidemiological perspective, we get a lot of pushback from people when the idea of like not eating more frequently. I think that because so many people today are metabolically deranged, suggesting fasting is scary, because I have friends that can't fast. I have friends that if they miss a meal, they start getting the shakes.
Yeah.
And you know, and we have that term hangry, right? We get angry, we need food. And the reality is that from an evolutionary perspective, we have ancestors that were able to go for long periods of time, unfathomable 2-3 days without food, because, you know, it was the ice age, or they just couldn't catch an animal or whatever. And they didn't die. And yet our population has gotten to the point where if they go 2 or 3 hours without food, they feel like the end of the world is coming. It's really, and I would imagine that kind of charges this topic we're going to talk about. Like, wait a minute, I can only eat 8 hours a day. What do I do before Jimmy Kimmel? I like to have my pizza right before Jimmy Kimmel's show comes on, you know.
You know, I think I see both sides of that coin. You know, when I've been doing research as well as this restricted eating for about 5 years or so now. And we certainly do see those people when we're trying to recruit studies and we explain what the study involves, what they'd be asked to do. You want me to do what? To eat less? Like, I don't think so. Or, you know, also when I tell people I want them to exercise, that some have the same reaction to my studies. But I think because there has been a fair bit of research and media coverage on time-restricted eating in particular, that people are actually quite open to it. They've heard about it. They're starting to come around to the idea that it is potentially a feasible way to kind of manage what you eat and your health in general. So I'm actually starting the opposite problem, where if I try to do a randomized control trial where you ask people not to follow time restricted eating, they don't want to be in the study because they don't want to be randomized. They want to try.
Yeah,
So,
right.
So, that's a potential positive side of all of the like media coverage.
That gives me hope. You saying that, I want to resist and say that's ridiculous, but it actually gives me hope because I think that from the early beginnings of the every other day diet, and then looking at sirtuins and markers of advanced aging, and then intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding. You're right. It is becoming much more mainstream. You're absolutely right.
I'll share a funny anecdote to that extent. When I was first planning this study, and I was putting together all the study materials that I give to participants, I usually like to test them out with people from a similar demographic to make sure understandable and so on. And so I sent this instruction booklet on how to do time restricted eating to my mom because she's the age demographic of the breast cancer survivors that were going to be in my study. And so I sent this to my parents, and my parents, who are in their 70s, had just decided on their own that they were going to follow time restricted eating.
That
and
is
had
funny.
read media articles about it, had no idea I was even doing research personally. So it certainly gets out there, and the majority of the participants that I tried to recruit for this study had heard of it before sending out this letter to invite them to participate. So I think that's a good sign. There is the
it is. I
seeking health information and easy interventions, and that's one of the things I really like about time restricted eating is it's quite pragmatic, and I think it's something that an everyday person can do.
The CDC is disingenuous when they say the number one killer of Americans is heart disease and number 3 is cancer, because that would be like me saying the number one thing that destroyed your home was the color of the walls and not the fact that your house is on fire. and I say this because the number one killer of Americans today is metabolic derangement. You can call it insulin resistance, you can call it type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, whatever it is that you want to call it is fine with me, as long as you understand that it is the reason for your heart disease. It is the reason for your fatty liver disease. It is the reason for your Alzheimer's disease. And if you look at some of Dr. Thomas Seyfried's work on cancer as a metabolic disease, where he makes a very sound argument for the mitochondria switching to anaerobic respiration, and then all of the oncogenes flipping after that, then you can also, now that's a stretch. There's a lot of people out there that won't buy that. Even with Otto Warburg's discovery about how cancer loves to eat all the glucose it can, even if you resist that idea, if you think about that for a second, who gets cancer? People who already have type 2 diabetes typically get cancer. So, it's a really exciting thought to me that someday some agency will say, we can cure 80% of the disease in this country if we can start getting people to do time restricted feeding, because without even noticing it, their insulin levels are going to drop. All of these pro-inflammatory cytokines are going to be reduced over time. They're going to lose weight because that's all we care about. Let's face it, humans are so vain. You'll live 50 years longer. You'll lose weight. Okay, I'll do it. But it's like we are finally at a precipice where I feel that the message that metabolic disease is the number one killer of Americans today can actually be spoken, because people like you are finding. Let's talk about your study. Why did this study need to be? I'm sorry. Once I get going, Doctor. Yeah. Why did this study need to be done? What preceded this work that made this a question?
Sure. So my primary area of research expertise and focus is a newer medical and research discipline called cardiooncology. Mm-hmm. And so cardiooncology deals primarily with the potential for cancer treatments to cause injury to the heart and the vessels and ultimately lead to an increased risk of cardiovascular mortality in cancer survivors. So this is primarily a concern for the cancer diagnoses that have high survival rates from the cancer itself. So one of my focuses is early stage breast cancer. So the survival rate for early stage breast cancer has increased by 40% over the last 40 years, which is absolutely phenomenal. It's very good news. But now that once you have an early stage breast cancer diagnosis and you go through the cancer treatments and there's a very high chance of survival, we're now concerned about the secondary effects of those cancer treatments. And the primary concern is this potential injury to the cardiovascular system that ultimately increases the risk of dying from cardiovascular mortality after a breast cancer diagnosis to 3 to 6-fold higher compared to matched women of the same age in the population, in the general population overall. So that's one of my areas of focus of research. Yes.
Okay, I have a couple questions. First of all, I've always known about ionizing radiation and left breast cancer treatment, because the ionizing radiation that is destroying the breast cancer goes a little bit further and starts to damage the heart. I've always known about that, but what chemotherapies seem to damage the heart?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Left-sided breast cancer radiation is one of the potential mechanisms that causes injury to the heart from breast cancer treatment. I will say that the radiation techniques have significantly improved over the last several decades, and they can now plan the treatment so that it minimizes exposure to the heart. So that has improved a lot, but it is still a factor. And then there's a particular type of chemotherapy treatments, a class of agents called anthracyclines. So these consist of drugs like doxorubicin, epirubicin, daunorubicin, and idarubicin. And so these class of chemotherapy agents tend to have an affinity for the heart muscle and actually cause the heart muscle cells to be injured, potentially irreversibly, and die as a result of the chemotherapy treatment. It's also a dose response type of injury, which means that the injury starts with the first chemotherapy treatment and it gets worse over time, every subsequent chemotherapy treatment as well.
That's so sad for women who are surviving breast cancer only to die prematurely because of a secondary effect of the treatment. And that, it's so sad.
It is. It's this concept of curing cancer but killing the heart. It's kind of a title that I've used to be very on the nose about it, because it is very unfortunate. And the reason that these chemotherapy agents are still used is that they are quite effective in reducing the risk of cancer recurrence. And so they're not only used in breast cancer, they're also used to treat childhood cancers, lung cancers, ovarian cancer, like
where they have the same damaging effect on the heart, I would imagine.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really so while you selected this particular cohort, because there was enough data out there to compare your results with the general results, this research that you've done here is going to help a lot of people who didn't have breast cancer. They had other types of cancers. That's wonderful.
Yes, there's potentially many millions of cancer survivors alive today who have survived cancer and have had these anthracycline treatments and now have this potentially irreversible injury to their heart. So any kind of therapies that we can help to reduce the cardiovascular risk in these patient populations could potentially help a wide range of individuals. And I do tend to focus on early stage breast cancer, but you're exactly right. Like if we can find that it's helpful in this particular patient group, then we can certainly expand to other patient types in the future. And that is my plan.
Describe your study. How many people were in the study? What did they have to meet? What requirements did they have to meet? And then what did you do? How did you learn?
Sure. So I think I'll maybe start a step back from there and talk about why I first became interested in using this type of intervention for this patient population. So I talked about so far about how the cancer treatments for early stage breast cancer in particular are known to cause injury to the heart. But another area of my research is studying how the cancer treatments affect all healthy tissues in the body. And so I became interested in what these same cancer treatments that we know are injuring the heart are doing to the skeletal muscle, which is the largest organ and one of the largest organs in the body. And so I did a number of studies looking at what happens to the skeletal muscle. And one of the primary findings that I found, one of the lasting effects of this cancer treatment, is increased fat deposition inside the skeletal muscle. So this is called intramuscular fat. And I also found that there was increased fat deposition around the internal organs, which is something that we call visceral fat. And so we know that these locations of fat are the primary fats, the primary link between fat and cardiovascular risk. So the location of fat deposition is much more important than the total quantity of body fat in terms of cardiovascular risk. So we know this from years of research in non-cancer populations. And so my research findings found that this was a primary concern with cancer treatments, that not only did these fat depots increase really quickly within a couple of months of getting chemotherapy treatment, but they also stayed elevated. And so these people have now survived cancer and going on to live their normal lives. But now that these kind of bad fat locations are much higher and are potentially playing a role in that increased risk.
So does chemotherapy affect insulin sensitivity? And the reason I ask that is because what you just described is typical for a person who is moving into metabolic derangement.
Exactly.
The body starts storing fat in inappropriate places, like the liver, like around the heart, like around the organs, and most importantly, in the muscle. By the way, those of you who are big fans of Wagyu beef, you're basically eating cows who are metabolically deranged. Yeah, they've got muscle fat. They're sick. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Is there an insulinogenic effect of chemotherapy?
Yeah, so once I found these findings, and you think about the implications, like you just said, is kind of a trigger for these metabolic complications. So I became aware of there's not a lot of work looking at the effects of chemotherapy on metabolic derangements, but a good colleague of mine who's at Dana-Farber Institute, Dr. Christina Dielli-Conway, did an observational study where she looked at about 85 women, just did measurements pre and post chemotherapy for early stage breast cancer, and she found a 108% increase in insulin resistance with just 15 weeks of chemotherapy. Inflammation increased by about 32%. Body fat stores increased similar to, she didn't do the ectopic fat depots that I did, but very clear evidence of major metabolic dysfunction occurring. The really interesting finding from her study as well was that she excluded any women at baseline who already had metabolic syndrome. So these were metabolically healthy women going through chemotherapy. And again, it was about 15 weeks of chemotherapy. And at the end, 76% of them had metabolic syndrome.
This is really astonishing to me. Again, it comes back to my plea at the beginning of the show that let's start understanding that metabolic derangement is the #1 killer of Americans, and maybe we'll start paying attention to things that cause it, even therapeutic in general. But yes. I guess the other question becomes, did you see the study from about 8 years ago that looked at pre-treating cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy with the ketogenic diet. And what they saw was less damage to the healthy cells. Are you familiar with that study?
Not that particular one, but caloric restriction has shown the same effects. So selective stress resistance is the phenomenon that's been named after that, where it can potentially help to sensitize the cancer cells because they have this aberrant metabolism to the damaging effects of the cancer treatment, but it actually helps to protect. It increases resistance in those healthy cells to the damaging effects of the cancer treatment. So I have done some research in that area as well, doing actually short-term either ketogenic and or caloric restriction diets just in a few days prior to each chemotherapy treatment to kind of prime the system to receive those treatments as well.
And what, you know, when the whole keto movement started, that was another one that I was like, okay, everybody, you know, let's just relax a little bit, because while the therapeutic the therapeutic keto diet, which has been approved by the FDA for treatment of seizures and epilepsy in young children, is like 80% fat. Most people have a hard time adhering to it. I argue that any dietary approach that produces ketones, whether it's a half a millimole first thing in the morning or 1 or 2 millimoles a day, is in fact the ketogenic diet. And we know that people who do time-restricted fasting, they go in and out of ketosis in that period. So it sounds to me like the oncology profession who's listening to this interview should say to themselves, maybe it would be a good idea to put people on a time-restricted fast of eating protocol in preparation for their chemotherapy, because maybe the presence of ketones and the change in dietary intake will be protective. What do you think?
Yes, so this is an area of active investigation. People are interested in this exact kind of theme of upregulating these potential protective pathways and using nutrition as a metabolic therapy during active cancer treatment. I have a study myself starting within a few months where we're going to be doing time-restricted eating in combination with improving diet quality through registered dietitian counseling during chemotherapy treatment as a way to try to prevent this increase in visceral fat and intramuscular fat and general metabolic toxicity is what I would call it as a result of the cancer treatment. But it is something that we actually need to study first before medical oncologists are going to start prescribing it. So when we're actually talking about active cancer treatment, there's other safety concerns, associated with all the potential side effects that are happening from the cancer treatment themselves. One major concern when we talk about anything to do with caloric restriction or intermittent fasting during active treatment is potential lean mass loss.
Yeah,
cachexia. We really want to avoid that from happening during active cancer treatment. And so we have all these safety mechanisms included in my study where we're actually going to try to study time-restricted eating during chemotherapy and also counseling people to not reduce their calorie intake too much during that time, really focus on the quality of their intake, and then to be weighing them throughout the treatment and evaluating changes in their lean mass. So that type of work does need to be done, and it is, my study and other studies are in progress. But I certainly think there'll be that interest, and anecdotally, my medical oncology colleagues report that patients ask them all the time about time-restricted eating, caloric restriction.
Good.
So patients are coming across this information on their own, and they're interested. So there is that desire, but we're not quite at the point where we can recommend it for patients.
Yeah, no, I get it. Because you're not reckless. You're not like the people who write the press releases and say outlandish things just to get someone to pay attention to their headline. So talk about the study. So what interventions, who was the cohort? It was made up of how many women and what were their parameters?
Right. So in the study, I specifically wanted to focus on the breast cancer survivors who were at greatest risk for cardiovascular mortality. So I enrolled women with 3 characteristics that have been shown in the literature to be associated with more cardiovascular mortality after a breast cancer diagnosis. So those are that they have previously received this anthracycline chemotherapy treatment, which is known to injure the heart, that they are currently over the age of 60, and that they have a body mass index over 25 kilograms per meter squared. So they're considered overweight according to that BMI category. So we enrolled 22 women in total. It was a single arm study, which means that everyone who joined the study followed the intervention. There was no control arm. And so we did that as our first study in any cancer population using time-restricted eating, because we really needed to establish, A, is it feasible? So can patients actually follow this diet?
Right.
And B, is it safe for them to perform? So we need to know if there's any major adverse events that occur, and even if there are no major adverse events, but what are the symptoms that we can tell future people who follow the intervention to expect? So we had the 22 women follow time-restricted eating for 8 weeks, and we used a novel protocol of time-restricted eating where they only had to follow it on weekdays. So Monday to Friday, they were asked to restrict their eating to an 8-hour window between 12 and 8 p.m. And we specifically chose that window because it allows people to still have their lunch and dinner at a usual time. And so
the whole diet was socially friendly. They could go out on the weekends if they wanted to and relax, and they could eat pretty. I mean, like I stopped eating at 6 p.m. at night, but they could eat pretty late into the evening. So, and then they just have to stay up a few hours before they go to bed. So that makes it easier for them to comply with it.
Exactly. And that's, I've worked with this population for well over a decade, and I kind of know the things that are important to them. And we've had studies before where we made people follow a specific diet on the weekend, and they reported that doesn't work with their family life. Like they want to have their family dinners, and that's very important to their lives. So we used this weekday only model. It was based on an animal study. Like no study has looked at this in humans yet. But the animal study showed that following time-restricted eating just the Monday to Friday, and even if the animals had access to high fat and high sugar on the weekends, they still had similar decreases to insulin resistance and fat mass as a group of animals following it every day.
And I was thinking to myself, these are people in their 60s, like me, and we are creatures of habit. And we also seek out convenience in our lives because we're old enough now where we're like, I don't want to spend my time doing wasteful things. I want to stay focused on the core issues of my life. So it would seem to me that they probably would still do the same window of eating on the weekends just because they find it's convenient. Intermittent fasting, time-restricted feeding, whatever you want to call it, those of us who have been doing it for over decades now know that it's just so much more convenient to just put off eating first thing in the morning, get your day started, do things, and then eat later on throughout the day, not too late into the evening. So how many of them actually kept doing it on the weekend? I'm curious.
Yeah, so that's correct. Actually, we anecdotally had participants tell us that, we just kept doing it on the weekend because it was easy. So, in future, that's a good lesson for us, is that maybe not everyone needs the weekends off. So I am planning a future study where we're kind of comparing, where we let people choose how and when to do it versus having them follow a specific standardized protocol. So I'll have results for that in about a year. But we certainly had individuals report that. And on the flip side, the intervention was only 8 weeks long, and we followed up with people a year later, and some of them are still following it, even though we've said, that they don't need to keep following the
Well,
study.
and one of the studies that we talked about on the show years ago, where they used the ketogenic diet in conjunction with chemotherapy, was that the patients that did well in that paper, they continued to eat that way for years, and they followed up with them, and they said that the recidivism rate of their cancers was negligible. Like, while all the other people went back and ate the way they used to eat after the study,
Right.
their cancers came back. But the people who were like, hey, I like eating like this, and they just continued on, their cancers didn't come back. And
Right.
that wasn't the goal of the study. The study just wanted to show that pre-treating with the keto diet when undergoing chemotherapy was good for the patient. What they found out was it was also protective of regaining your cancer later on in life.
Right, and I think that's one of the most exciting things for me about time-restricted eating is it's something that could potentially be easy to follow longer term. So we still haven't had many studies that have implemented a time-restricted eating intervention that's more than about 16 weeks. There's just one study that came out with a 12-month intervention, but what I'm interested in is the next step is, kind of delivering an intervention and providing support to the patients for a certain period of time, and then removing that support and seeing how much they do it on their own.
Right.
Because doing these studies is a lot of personnel time on our part to, support the patients and so on. So I have some studies planned where we're going to look at that next. But
you're in a very exciting space right now. There's a lot of science out there today that I see, and I go, why? Like, why do we even need to know? Why do we need to know that? Come on.
Yeah.
Like, can't we just anecdotally go, hey, people do? But I think you're in a really exciting space because not only are you unlocking the metabolic linkages to a lot of these disease states, but you're going to come up with, because I hate science that has no actionable steps. Like, we learn something like, senescent cells and Alzheimer's disease. Okay, how do I get rid of the senescent cells? Oh, we don't know that yet. That
Right.
sucks. Like, when do we? You've got plans for actionable steps that could be easily implemented by people and fairly non-heroic and painless on top of it. It's like, you still can eat the food you want to eat. You just can only eat them during these times. And,
Yeah.
I think
And that was reflected in our adherence data from the study. So the 22 breast cancer survivors, our adherence to the 8-week intervention was 98%. Like, what other lifestyle intervention has adherence that high? Like, exercise doesn't, other nutrition strategies don't. So it really just demonstrates the feasibility of this type of intervention. And you're right. Like, I try to plan my research and I look down the line and think about what is this an intervention that most people will be able to do? And can it actually be implemented potentially in clinical practice? And so that's the other thing about time-restricted eating that I'm excited about, is it's so simple to prescribe. So if we get to the point where we know that it has robust health effects and that it's safe and that we can actually have clinicians start prescribing it to their patients, the conversation to do that in the clinician's office consists of simply saying, I want you to start eating at this time and stop eating at this time and don't consume anything outside of that window. Done.
I want to take our first commercial break. And when we come back, I want to talk about the markers that you looked at. Did you look at fasted blood sugar? And then obviously a continuous glucose monitor would be a great thing to add to this to get a lot more information. So we're talking right now with Dr. Amy Kirkham about some really exciting research on dietary interventions as therapeutics for people who have damage done to their hearts by chemotherapy. But this discussion is so much more expansive than that. Let's do this. Let's take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. Stay with me. Most people have heard of phytoestrogens, but did you know there are beneficial phytoandrogens? The top source of these is pine pollen. It even contains trace amounts of testosterone and DHEA. If you're looking for a 100% natural testosterone booster, this is worth trying. Lots of men love it, and it even works for women. Lost Empire Herbs offers the highest quality wild harvested, non-irradiated pine pollen backed by a 365-day money-back guarantee. It works for you, or you don't have to pay for it with nothing to send back. Go to shrnetwork.biz/lostempire. Use code SHR. Get 15% off your order today. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/mypillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High-quality, pasture-raised, great-tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose-to-tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 10% off your entire first order. Are you suffering from signs of an unhappy gut? Diversity is the key to healthy, robust inner ecosystem. Body Ecology probiotic liquids are made by fermenting organic seeds, biodynamic brown rice, and chickpeas together to create a diverse culture found nowhere else on Earth. It's the secret to restoring your gut's microbiome for a healthier digestive tract, improved immune function, and longevity. Take 20% off by visiting the website shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. That's BODYECO. And using the code SHR20. The Hercules pre-workout from Lost Empire Herbs is like no pre-workout you have ever had before. Completely natural formula designed specifically to optimize workouts, provide quicker recovery time, provide adequate nutrition, and get you away from all those no-good, overstimulating pre-workout supplements on the market today. The Hercules pre-workout blend is a mix of extracted natural herbs and mineral pitch. No fake colors, no added flavors, nothing else. Not only will Hercules pre-workout formula help your workouts, but you'll likely discover lots and lots of side effects, beneficial side effects. Go to shrnetwork.biz/lostempire today to learn more.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where brawn and brains finally meet.
Hey, welcome back. These are the kind of topics we talk about on this show. For 16 years, we've been bringing you science on the edge, the bleeding edge, because a lot of this research you're not going to hear about for a very, very long time unless you tune into Superhuman Radio. So share this show today, because you never know who's out there that's struggling with a challenge in their lives, cancer, heart, or a combination of both, that'll hear this and give this a try, and the outcome will be fantastic for them. We're talking with Dr. Amy Kirkham. We're talking specifically about dietary interventions that seem to be protective when a person has undergone a type of chemotherapy that has damaged their heart. But it's so much more than that. So what markers did you look at, Dr. Kirkham?
Yeah, so I'll say that the publication that we're talking about, it was published in JACC CardioOncology as a research letter, which means that it's a shortened amount of word count. So within that publication, we reported on some, but not all of the measures that we did in the study. So in that publication, we reported that we found a significant decrease in visceral fat, which is that location of fat deposition around the internal organs, which is thought to be the most strongly tied to cardiovascular risk. So again, this was only an 8-week intervention that was quite easy for participants to follow. So we thought that was quite an important finding because among breast cancer survivors, this visceral fat pool has been tied to the risk of later cardiac events. And I will point out that this is a risk factor even in people with a normal body mass index. So someone who has the body mass index below 25, which is that kind of healthy threshold, if they have higher visceral fat, they're still more likely to have increased cardiac events.
So, did you look at fasting blood sugar at all in these individuals?
We did. We measured fasting glucose in these participants. That was not reported in that paper. We didn't find a significant change over time. What I think was happening there is based on the literature of time-restricted eating in other populations, I think we need a longer intervention to have those lasting metabolic health effects. We also measured hemoglobin A1C. We didn't see a change in that over time. But again, it was only an 8-week intervention. So my next study that I have planned is going to be 16 weeks. And so we suspect we have a better chance at seeing improvements in those blood glucose levels as well.
Was there any direction or mention of different types of dietary templates like the Mediterranean diet? The reason I ask this is because some of the work by doctors Kekwik and Pawan from 1952, 56, they did some interesting research. Are you familiar with who I'm talking about?
Well, I'm familiar with the Mediterranean diet, yes.
Well, no, but what Kekwik and Pawan did was they took women and they put them on a eucaloric diet, one that should not make them gain weight, not lose weight, just keep them at their body weight. But what they did was they required the 3 different groups of women to get 75% of their daily calories from a specific macronutrient, either fat, protein, or carbohydrates. And they learned a lot of interesting stuff in this research. But the one thing that was really kind of in your face and made you start thinking differently about different food sources was the only group that actually gained body fat was the group that was eating 75% carbohydrates. And if you juxtapose that to Dr. Otto Warburg and this notion that glucose feeds cancers, and we are talking about metabolic derangement, which seems to hinge on your body's ability to manage blood sugar, I would be interested to find out if, in fact, you had one group that only ate vegetable-based carbohydrates, sparing starches and staying away from pastas and rices and cereal grains and all that sort of stuff, how that flips these switches.
In this particular study, we did not give them any instructions on changing their diet whatsoever, other than the time parameters. And so I agree. Like, I personally follow low carb diets for many years, and that does take some work and some practice, though. So the thing that I really like about time-restricted eating in terms of it being something that anyone can do is it doesn't take that much thought or planning to do it. Whereas like doing 75% of your calories from a specific macronutrient does take a fair bit of work.
Oh, and a lot of the women fell out of the fat side because they just couldn't eat that much fat, which makes sense. But I think that if we can at least pass along to these individuals that, hey, by the way, blood sugar, cancer, metabolic derangement, high carbohydrate diet, like maybe they'll think to themselves, well, I can cut back on my starches and my carbs, just without a lot of effort. I can just start eliminating this and that. Because I really believe that there's going to be some nuances to that diet. I really do.
For sure. And that's something we're doing in my new study, where we're doing time restricted eating plus diet quality during chemotherapy. Awesome. We're providing counseling on making those appropriate dietary changes and trying to minimize sugar intake and refined carbohydrates, and emphasize healthy fats, and quality protein as well. And so I think that during chemotherapy is an opportune time to intervene, because people are willing to accept health information and to make changes in their life at that time.
Right.
So I'm excited for that study to see what we find through the combination of both time restricted eating and diet quality. There hasn't been that many studies that have combined the two. Some studies have combined time restricted eating with calorie restriction. There was just a big study published in the New England Journal of Medicine that did that.
What did they find?
So they compared time restricted eating plus 25% caloric restriction to just 25% caloric restriction without any time restriction. And their primary outcome was weight loss, and they essentially found similar amounts of weight loss over the year intervention between the two groups. The weight loss did favor the time-restricted eating group, but it didn't reach statistical significance. Right. So potentially there's a small effect there. It was a really rigorously done study, but my kind of lack of excitement about the finding is that it takes a lot of work to follow a 25% caloric restriction diet, to plan your meals, to track everything, in an app or online. So my interest in time-restricted eating is following what we call an ad libitum prescription, which means they can eat whatever and whatever they want within those time parameters.
Right.
They don't have to record anything. They don't have to think about it. And so in my study, we did have the participants do 3-day diet records before they started following the intervention and in the last week. And we found that just by restricting the time window that they consume food, they naturally reduced their calorie intake by a median of 22%.
Yeah, and as soon as you tell people, well, you can't eat this and you can't eat that, game over.
Yeah.
I love that. I look forward to that every day. Okay, you could keep eating it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What about, there's a lot of companies out there that are making fasting mimicking diets now. It just takes the thought out of it. You're going to eat these 5 meals today and they're already calculated. What do you think there's room for those in a kind of medical food management arena?
I mean, if you can afford to pay for all of your prepared meals, that's a luxury that a lot of people cannot afford, especially when you think about individuals who are in a family and they're having to prepare meals for their family as well. So then how does that work? Do you buy meals for your entire family through these prepared sources? That's a model I have done in research studies, where you provide the food because that's going to enhance adherence. It's going to be easy for participants to follow, but how does that actually work in the real world, in clinical practice? In Canada, we have socialist healthcare. We're not going to be paying for people's meals.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Chemotherapy, that's just not a possibility.
Obviously, exercise wasn't required. But did you have any participants who were purposefully more active because they thought it would be healthier for them?
We did measure physical activity. We had participants wear accelerometer armbands before they started the intervention and in the last week. This wasn't published in the JACC article yet, but we didn't see any changes in physical activity across the intervention, because that was something that I was interested in as well. Potentially with any intervention where you're reducing calorie intake, that can actually reduce physical activity. If people feel more tired because they're not getting as much energy intake, sometimes that will lead to reduced physical activity. And then, like you said, there's also the possibility that the opposite effect happens, where people are they are aware that they're making this positive health change, and that motivates them to do other health changes as well. And so overall, we didn't see any changes in the physical activity patterns. I will say that anecdotally, this patient population that we enrolled in the study, a lot of these women reported either not having interest or not having the ability to perform much physical activity. You know, they have a history of knee pain or, you know, different physical ailments, which, you know, it's a common thing as individuals age.
Heart function alone, you know, we know that there's a feedback loop where the heart tells the body, hey, don't push me so hard. And it presents itself as fatigue. So, yeah,
so I think, you know, my primary background is as an exercise scientist. Like, I've done a lot of research doing exercise interventions in cancer survivors during treatment, after treatment. And so I'm a huge proponent of exercise, of course, but doing this study where it only involved the nutrition intervention, it made me really realize that we're potentially excluding a lot of individuals with a history of cancer who need a health intervention, but exercise may not be the right fit for them.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. We're going to take our last commercial break. When we come back, we'll wrap up this interview. Stay tight. We'll be right back with more of Dr. Amy Kirkham. You're watching and listening to Superhuman Radio. Don't forget, share the show.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
Are you 35 or older? Every year after puberty, your growth hormone decreases sometimes by 50% by the age of 35, and it only keeps going down from there. This affects everything from making it harder to recover from workouts, sleep, and a general loss of a sense of well-being. It also affects your ability to get and stay lean. BioPro Plus is the first of its kind, 100% non-synthetic alternative to prescription synthetic growth hormone treatments. All the benefits without any of the needles or side effects, and 100% safe. Previously only available through doctors, you can go to shrnetwork.biz/biopro, that's BIOPRO, and use code SHR30 for $30 off today. If you've listened to Superhuman Radio for any length of time, you know I'm a big proponent of peptides. One of my favorites is GHKCU, the blue copper peptide. It has the ability to repair and regenerate more youthful expressions of skin cells, reversing the signs of aging. Restore Cell's Stem Cell Awakening Serum, along with their other products, contain potent formulations of blue copper peptide and only the highest quality organic ingredients. Superhuman Radio listeners can now save 25% site-wide. Buy their complete set and receive a free exfoliating cleanser. Go to shrnetwork.biz/blue and use the code SHR25. That's SHR25. Remodel your skin today. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. How often do you wake up in the morning and instantly wish you had just another hour of sleep? Maybe you didn't get enough sleep, or you have brain fog, your energy is low, or you just can't concentrate. You run for coffee or an energy drink, but that barely moves the needle. Imagine having control over how you feel and being able to just flip a switch and turn on your brain within 10 minutes of waking up without coffee or caffeine. I've personally experienced this over the past few months since trying Newtopia. Newtopia is the most advanced brain support and cognitive enhancement system that I've ever tried. It's like a chemistry set for your brain. Newtopia specializes in personalized brain supplements, also known as nootropics. Newtopia has raised the bar on the nootropic category beyond anything that exists today. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Newtopia. That's NOOTOPIA and enter the code SHR10 for an additional 10% off. You will not be disappointed in this product.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. We're ripped and we're ready.
Welcome back. We're going to wrap up the interview with Dr. Amy Kirkham. Before we do that, I have to give a plug for somebody. Sheath Underwear has changed men's underwear forever. And I'm not just saying that. If you haven't heard about them, you're missing out. They have multiple pouches so you can keep stuff separated. Because the old style of men's underwear where it just crushes everything together doesn't work for most men. Go to shrnetwork.biz/sheath underwear, SHEATHUNDERWEAR. Use the code superhuman and save 20% off. I promise you, if you give them a try, you will never wear any other underwear. So with that being said, Dr. Kirkham, was there anything that really surprised you in this study? Like, wow, we did not expect to see that.
Yeah, first of all, I was surprised at the level of adherence. Like I said, 98% median adherence is very high for any intervention. Whenever you try to get humans to do something to change their behavior, it's usually pretty hard. And secondly, we found a significant decrease in the Framingham 10-year cardiovascular risk score. And so this was an important parameter for this patient population because I mentioned that they're at increased cardiovascular mortality. So again, just 8 weeks resulted in a 15% relative reduction in cardiovascular risk. A related kind of subgroup analysis that we did that was quite surprising was we specifically looked at the women who at baseline were considered metabolically unhealthy. Okay, so we define this as women who either had metabolic syndrome or they met the criteria to need a pharmacological reduction in cardiovascular risk management. So this would be like prescribing them a statin to reduce their cardiovascular risk.
Right.
So within those 15 out of the 22 that met that criteria, we found that just 8 weeks following the time-restricted eating intervention either reversed metabolic syndrome or reversed their need to require a statin.
Wow.
The remaining participants in that group all had positive effects. They were trending in the positive direction. So we think that if they continued for a bit longer, we would see those same effects. So that was quite powerful to me. Because if you could put that in a pill, give to people.
Listen, don't say that because someone will try to put it in a pill. No, yeah. This is it, folks. This is the Renaissance. This is the future of medicine. The future of medicine is stop putting stuff in your body that hurts you. It's I have a very good friend, Ron Penna, and we talk about diet a lot. And he's convinced me that it's not what you're eating, it's what you stopped eating that changes the game. And we eat way too much stuff that we shouldn't be eating to begin with. So that's really where it comes from. So, did you share this with the subjects, and did any of them become like, I'm so excited, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life?
Well, some of them on their own, just from their own experience with it and how they felt, just had already decided that they felt better than they had ever felt. Some of them were reporting that they felt better than before their breast cancer diagnosis even. and
Wow.
that this is going to become a big part of their lifestyle going forward. You know, and it is something that, you know, once we get to that point in time, once the research gets there, that I think people can be following it potentially long term. Like, we haven't had any long term studies, but you know, it's you may not have to be quite as strict, you know, following every exact parameter. But I personally have been doing it myself for probably about 3 years. You know, and if I have a cheat day, I have a cheat day, or you know, if it's Christmas or you get sick for a week, then you just, you know, kind of take a break and go back onto it. So I think it has that potential, and that's what excites me about it, in terms of a long-term health strategy.
How many of these women that were in this research are still have husbands or partners? You know?
I did ask that. I think it was pretty high. I would say about 3/4.
And I wonder, because you know, when you do dietary interventions, especially if they're pretty like real different than the way you've been eating, and you're married or in a relationship, it really does, in order to really be successful at it, a lot of times your partner needs to start eating this way too, because otherwise I'm preparing food for me and you're preparing food for you. Did any of the men get on board, and was there any anecdotal comments from them like, wow, I feel so great?
So we gave our participants kind of an instruction manual for following time restricted eating, and within that we had a tips and tricks section. And so we actually suggested that it might be easier for any adults that they live with, so including if they have adult children living at home. We don't recommend it for children, but you know, some people have adult children living with them still, that them and their spouse may want to follow it as well, because it is going to be easier to adhere if your whole family is kind of on that schedule. So we didn't collect any data about that, but that is maybe a good question for the next study. I would assume that it was the case, right? Like the anecdote I said at the top of the hour about my parents, like they made the decision to start following it together.
Right.
So I completely agree. And actually, I should make a plug that I first became interested in time restricted eating and realized how easy it was because of my husband choosing to follow it on his own. And he's not an academic. He just did his own research, you know, like just read some articles and decided to do it. So he should take some credit for what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The work I'm doing.
This is the beauty of the proliferation of information, but the real magic is giving it a try. And I think what people find when they start doing time restricted feeding, I like I said, I started doing it back around 2009, I think it was.
Wow.
Because some of the early research on rodents, and I thought, well, you know, I'll give this a try, and I still hit all my. Back then, I was powerlifting. I was probably about 270 pounds, and in 8 hours, I still managed to consume 7,000 calories.
Oh my gosh.
It took a lot of work. I have to be honest, but who cares where you learned about it? I mean, this is like information fire sweeping the countryside, and the beauty of this is the more people, like the kids, like if the kids learn to eat 8 hours a day, like they're going to benefit from that. I know that, you know, because kids will always eat more. They you know, they're little piranhas. They'll just keep eating. Mm-hmm. But it's like we could reduce the burden of illness in our country, which would have an effect on everything economic. I mean, you know, I've said on this show that with, you know, autism on this end, Alzheimer's on that end, and all of the metabolic disease in the middle, the thing that's going to crush us is the fact that a large portion of our population is going to be sick at some point in time. And that could all change if people would just go, you know, I'm just going to, like me, I eat from 10 to 6. That's my window, 10 to 6. And people, and it doesn't have to be 16 hours. We've learned that a 12 or 14 hour fast, which is probably the way we were back in the day, is more than adequate to make a lot of this magic happen. The more people learn about it, the better off we're going to be someday.
There, another study that's relevant to breast cancer survivors was an observational study where they just asked people when they normally start and stop eating. And it was in 2,400 breast cancer survivors, and just having an overnight fast of 13 hours or longer was associated, again, an observational study, was associated with a 36% reduction in breast cancer recurrence risk.
That's amazing.
13 hours, that's an 11-hour eating window.
That's like back in the day when I was a kid, everybody fasted 13, 14 hours because your mother cooked at 5 o'clock, your father came home from work, you ate, that was it. You were done. You didn't eat again until tomorrow morning. And I was never a big fan of breakfast. So I always went to school without breakfast. And I wasn't going to say hungry because I really wasn't hungry yet. Right.
Yeah. So I think a big part of it is this, it skews eating away from that bedtime period. So one, that helps to realign your eating patterns with the natural circadian rhythm, like you were discussing at the beginning there. And two, that tends to be the time that after 8 p.m. and after 10 p.m. tends to be the time where calories are primarily sugar based. People tend to have snacks and sweets and alcohol after those hours.
Yeah.
So you're kind of taking those things out of the equation. And one of those things, nothing good happens after 8 p.m. or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the other impact it has on your blood glucose is that by stopping your calorie intake a certain amount of time before you're going to bed, you're still being active, you're still going about your day, so you're giving your body a chance to actually utilize that glucose from your blood and uptake it into your muscles, so that by the time you go to bed, your blood sugar has decreased. And so you have a nice low fasting blood glucose overnight, which we know is associated with better sleep quality as well.
Yeah, because the factory's not working. Everybody's gone home. The factory is closed. If you're digesting food, so two things I want to mention about that, if I can compel people to give this a try. The first is Dr. Dale Bredesen has been on the show twice. His first study with 20 patients, and then his multi-centered study with 200 patients, where he can't say he reversed Alzheimer's disease because they didn't biopsy the brain and see if there's less protein accumulation. But his first two studies led to his book, An End to Alzheimer's, where he reversed the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease in 220 people, and now so many more that have bought his book.
Oh.
And one of the biggest things he required people to do was to not eat 3 hours before bedtime. Why? Because autophagy in the brain is completely blunted if you've eaten less than 3 hours before bedtime. What is autophagy? That's the sanitation department. It's getting rid of all those misfolded proteins, and organelles are breaking them down and reusing them elsewhere. So you're not getting that hyperaccumulation night after night after night after night after night, and then all of a sudden you're screwed. That was the first thing. The other thing is there's a phenomenon in cardiology called non-dippers. Non-dippers are people who go to bed, and through sleep, your heart rate is supposed to really slow down. Like mine gets down into the 40s when I'm tracking it. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, I always seem to dip at 3 a.m. in the morning. But if I eat a meal too close to bedtime, I don't get that dip. Well, non-dippers are more likely to die in their sleep from a heart attack. That, like, I don't know what the number is, but it's some stupid number like, oh my God, are you kidding me? That should be enough to tell people Don't eat before bed. You're going to kill yourself. I mean, it's just amazing. And this information must get out there because you're not going to hear it on the Today Show. You got to get it, this information here and places like this, because this information won't be on the Today Show for another 5 years.
Right.
That's why you got to share this show. I keep telling you, save someone's life and share this show. Really.
Yeah, it is really a topic that's relevant to everyone, right?
Yes.
It's a change that, most people are able to make. And it's, I only recently moved to Toronto about 2 years ago, and I've become popular just even with my neighbors because people know that I do this type of research, and like it's interesting to the average person, right? I get peppered with all these nutrition questions, and and a bunch of my neighbors have tried time-restricted eating as a result, and have had good health changes. So
I'm happy that people are interested, because when I first started doing this show, I started doing it on Clear Channel here in Louisville, 1080 AM WKJK, and I was trying desperately to get syndicated, and all of the program directors that I confronted with the show said, no, we're looking for political shows. Like, all we want to do is talk about politics, because people stay glued to the radio when they hear anything about politics. And I said, but my message is more relevant. How so? And I'd say, well, if you put 10 people in a room and you ask them who wants to live longer and be stronger as you age, I says, you think just the Republicans are going to raise their hands? I says, my message is ingrained in us from evolution to survive. They couldn't get their head around it. And so I ended up having to go internet. And that in 2008, I went straight internet. I was on a bunch of stations, and then I got off. I thought, I'm preaching to the wrong people. These people don't care. But your comment just now makes me happy, because that means your neighbors get it and more people are getting it. And it's just going to make the country a better place, the world a better place. That's all it is.
I completely agree. And I think it's, I would hope that most people, once you present them with something that's fairly easy and that it doesn't take too many life changes, there's no costs associated with it, and if we get to the point where we can have that really robust evidence, like especially my study was a single arm study, we need to do the randomized control trials to confirm these effects. But, I would hope that it's something that a lot of people, the majority of people, are going to be able to get on board with, because I like to think about, I like to do research that's going to help the most amount of people.
This is exciting. You'll actually, so many people do research that really, God bless them that they do it, but it really doesn't have any impact on people. But yours does. Yours is. Richard Miller, who's watching on YouTube, is asking if the 3-hour window before bed is a strict rule. According to Dr. Dale Bredesen, it is. Now, I have eaten later in the evening. I was still, and you don't count when you start eating. You count when you finished eating. So I'm done eating by 6 p.m. 99% of the time, but there are the occasions where, because of social requirements, I'm done eating at 7. I stay up till 10. Otherwise, I'm in bed at 9. But Bredesen showed that 3-hour window is a hard and fast rule. Yes.
And I would say too, in terms of blood glucose, I typically recommend a 3-hour window as well, from the time that you finish eating, to allow that blood glucose to get down as low as we can. One kind of tip or trick I would say is, if you don't have that full 3 hours, is doing exercise after that last meal can help to stimulate that glucose uptake a little bit further, quicker, sorry. So, like doing a post-exercise snack, or even just, a 20-minute walk after dinner would potentially help.
What's funny? There was a study published probably about 8 years ago that showed that a 10-minute walk after a meal, postprandial blood sugar, was affected to a greater degree than the gold standard of treating diabetes, which is metformin. Now, think about this. Like, I'm Italian. My grandparents, after they ate, they would go for a walk. The young people who were courting, they walked in the front. The older people walked in the back, and they would just all go out for a walk. This is a very European thing. I wrote a blog post probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and I suggested maybe the French paradox has nothing to do with the fact that they drink wine, eat cheese, and smoke cigarettes. It's the walk to and from the restaurant that is saving their lives. There is so much value in moving. In fact, I always thought, wouldn't it be great to have a commercial like campaign on TV where you get a bunch of celebrities, dancers, move after a meal to cure type 2 diabetes. It doesn't matter what you do. Get up and clean the house. Get up and dance. Go for a walk. But if we started moving after a meal, that alone would have such a profound effect on metabolic derangement. And we can't, because what's the natural thing? You eat a big meal and then you want to go to sleep.
Turn on Netflix.
Put on Netflix. Exactly.
Yeah, that's another area of research I'm starting to get into as well, is that post-exercise, the type of exercise, because I understand not everyone can do a full 30-minute walk, just depending on where you live in the world and the weather and so on. But yeah, like having more feasible strategies for something that people could do if they just live in an apartment. So we're doing some work on that. We have a study starting in the next month where we're going to be having women with metabolic dysfunction trying out different exercise routines after dinner with continuous glucose monitors. So
yeah, I mean, just do body weight squats. And a lot of people say, well, I can't squat. Then grab the door jambs and lean back, and you do what's called sissy squats. Do 10 of those, do that 5 times. Watch what happens to your blood sugar after you eat. It goes down. It goes down.
That is the alternative that we're testing, is a body weight exercise video. We're going to do like a shorter video, like 15 minutes of 1 minute of exercise on and off, and have different, feasible options, like a more challenging option. Because like you said, not everyone can do squats or lunges. People have balance problems. So these are the types of things and barriers that I try to think about if I want my research to reach as many possible people. We need to think about those things.
Yeah. And if you put a CGM on them, they can watch their blood sugar drop, which would be so exciting, because you can have them eat a meal and not do anything and watch their blood sugar rise 180 milligrams, 190 milligrams. And then, an hour and a half, 2 hours later, it starts coming down. If they clamp, a lot of people don't even clamp. It just goes higher and higher. But then you can have them do body weight squats holding onto a doorway, and they see their blood sugar coming up. All of a sudden, it just flattens out. And they're like, oh, my God, it turned it into a video game. Like, let's see how far I can push my blood sugar down tonight before bed. I think it's brilliant. And these are real solutions. God bless the pharmaceutical industry for coming out with this and that, but 99% of the pharmaceutical drugs today mask the problem. It's like telling somebody, if your smoke detector goes off, just take the battery out. Don't go looking to see if the house is on fire, because you just want that thing to stop squealing. The symptoms you experience is your body trying to get your attention to stop hurting it.
Right.
Stop hurting it. Listen,
and drugs are typically focused on one kind of negative outcome too, right? And so the thing about lifestyle interventions like diet, like exercise, is that there's pleiotropic effects. It affects more than one outcome. It has lots of different health benefits that you're not getting if you take that one drug that just lowers your blood glucose.
Right. Richard Miller makes a good point. They have those bouncy trampolines now that actually have rails around them for people who have balance issues. They can get in there and watch TV and bounce for a little while. That's another good one. Very good. Listen, I want to thank you for coming on today, because your work is so meaningful It's so easy and it's so actionable that I wish everyone on the planet could hear this interview and just take something away from it and give it a try. Just give it a try. So congratulations. This is great work. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me and being so interested. I love talking about this and love hearing that others agree that it is going to be impactful. That's certainly my ultimate goal. So appreciate it.
Are you on Instagram? People want to know if they can follow you on Instagram.
I am on Instagram. I don't do any academic work on there. It's primarily on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is at Amy A. Kirkham for Twitter, and I do some kind of academic work there.
There you go. So go to Twitter and follow her there, because I love Twitter because you can publish, you can post studies and comments, and it's a better platform for sharing science, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kirkham. I'm sure we will have you back on as soon as some new research is published. Take care.
Great. Thank you.
And that's it for today. Tomorrow is Tuesday, which is the Blueprint Power Hour. If you want to come and talk about exercise, that's the show to do it. We talk about all different modalities of exercise and training and building muscle, because muscle is metabolic currency. So get into the gym and make a deposit today. We are learning, the only research shown in humans to extend life is research on strength and muscle. Women to 60 and men to 65, the more muscle you carry into those years, the longer you will live and the longer you will be disease-free. This has been shown in science, but we've been talking about it since the inception. This show was started in 2007, right? No, wait, 2005, I'm sorry. And I used to close every show with saying muscle is metabolic currency, so get into the gym and make a deposit today. And the motto of the show is live stronger, live longer. And there's a reason why I put stronger in front of longer, because the stronger you are, the harder you are to kill. And that's the facts. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow with more Superhuman Radio. Thank you for being here today.